Welcome back for another deep dive with us. So today we're going to be looking at Chapter 4 from the book A Practical Empath, Rewire Your Mind by Scott Howard Swain.
Right.
And we're going to be focusing on his system that he calls PEP, Practical Empathy Practice.
Yeah.
And this is all about kind of like connecting more genuinely with other people and understanding their perspective.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I think is most interesting about PEP is it's not about, imposing your own views on people or trying to like manipulate somebody into feeling a certain way.
Right.
It's more about just creating a space where people can genuinely connect and understand each other.
Okay.
And where both people can feel heard.
So how does that actually work?
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds really great, but it also sounds kind of like, different than how we often communicate.
Sure.
Where it's like, I'm trying to get my point across or you're trying to get your point across.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, PEP draws heavily from the principles of nonviolent communication, or NVC, which some of you may already be familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And it uses a similar structure, focusing on these 4 elements.
Okay.
Observation, feelings, needs, and requests.
Okay.
But what makes PEP really unique is the way that it streamlines these concepts and makes them a lot more practical for everyday use.
So it's like NVC, but more practical.
Exactly.
All right, so let's break it down a little bit.
Okay.
Let's start with observation. Why is observation so important to this PEP system?
Well, I mean, think about it. Like, before you can even really begin to understand someone's perspective, you really need to be able to accurately observe what's going on without letting your own judgments and interpretations kind of cloud your perception.
And that's the tricky part, right? Because we all have our own biases.
Mm-hmm.
We all have our own filters that we're looking through.
Absolutely.
And so how do we make sure that we are actually seeing clearly and not just like projecting our own stuff onto the situation?
That's where the distinction between observation and evaluation comes in. Swain really emphasizes separating what actually happened from our opinions about it. It's kind of like the difference between being a reporter who's just stating the facts and a commentator who's offering an opinion.
So like instead of saying my coworker was being so lazy today,
right,
a more objective observation would be my coworker didn't finish their assigned tasks by the deadline.
Exactly. It sounds really simple, but it's actually quite a profound shift.
Right.
Because it helps us to become less reactive and more open to really understanding the other person's perspective.
And it also probably helps the other person feel heard.
For sure.
And validated.
Yes.
Which is, part of building that trust and connection.
Absolutely.
So, so once we've got that observation piece down, what's next in the PEP process?
Well, after we've observed the situation objectively, the next step is to kind of tune into the feelings that are involved, both our own feelings and the other person's feelings.
Feelings. All right. So this is where I think it can get a little messy sometimes.
Yeah.
Because, feelings can be complex.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't even want to admit to ourselves what we're feeling.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that?
And that's why Swain really emphasizes the importance of developing a rich vocabulary of feelings.
Okay.
He actually provides in the book these extensive lists of feeling words that are categorized by whether they stem from satisfied or unmet needs.
So just having a broader range of words to describe how we feel can actually help us communicate better.
Absolutely. Think about it. Like, if you only have a few basic words to describe your emotional state, like, good or bad or, you're really missing out on a whole spectrum of nuance that can help you understand yourself better and also connect with other people more deeply.
Totally. I mean, like, instead of just saying, I'm upset.
Right.
If you could say, I'm feeling disappointed and frustrated because I was really hoping for a different outcome.
Exactly. That gives so much more information and context to the other person.
That's so true. Okay, so that's for us, but then what about for the other person?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that by becoming more attuned to our own feelings, we actually become more skilled at recognizing and understanding other people's feelings.
Well, how did that work? Were we talking about reading body language or something?
Well, intuition can definitely play a role,
right.
But PEP actually encourages what Swain calls empathetic guessing.
Empathetic guessing. What's that?
It's where we use the information that we have to kind of make educated guesses about what the other person might be feeling.
Interesting. So, like, for example, let's say you have a coworker who is always late for meetings.
Okay.
Instead of jumping to the conclusion that they are just, like, disrespectful or lazy.
Right.
We could say, well, what are the feelings that might be driving their behavior?
Exactly.
Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe they're stressed.
Maybe they're disengaged.
So it's about like understanding those underlying feelings that might be motivating their actions.
Yeah.
Rather than just judging the behavior at face value.
Exactly. And Swain points out that this actually works both ways.
Okay.
So by paying attention to our own feelings, we can also gain valuable insights into our own needs and values.
I see. So we've observed the situation objectively. Yeah. We've tuned into the feelings that are involved, both ours and the other person's, and we've started to consider the needs that might be at play.
Right.
So what's the final step in this PEP formula?
The final step is the request.
Okay.
This is where we shift from understanding to action,
right,
and we communicate what we would like to see happen.
So this is where we actually say what we want.
Yes, but there's a nuance to it.
Okay.
PEP really emphasizes making what are called positive, doable requests.
Okay.
So requests that focus on what we do want rather than what we don't want.
Okay.
And these requests should always be presented in a way that respects the other person's right to say no.
So instead of saying to our chronically late coworker, stop being late to meetings, a more PEP-aligned request would be, would you be willing to let me know if something comes up that prevents you from getting to the meeting on time?
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay, so it's more about collaboration, not control.
Yes.
We're inviting the other person to work with us toward a solution that meets both of our needs.
Yeah, it feels so much more respectful and less confrontational than just like telling someone what to do.
Right. But I have to admit, this whole needs thing is still tripping me up a bit.
Okay.
Because it just feels kind of vague and abstract to me.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it might come across as a little bit too touchy-feely in certain situations.
Okay.
You know, like in a business setting or with someone who's very direct and to the point.
That's a really insightful observation, and Swain actually addresses that very concern in the book.
Okay.
He acknowledges that the term needs can sound kind of clinical or jargony. Right. And it might not be well received in all situations.
So what does he suggest we do instead?
He actually encourages us to be flexible with our language and consider using words like wants, values, or even preferences instead of needs, especially when we're first starting out with PEP or when we're talking to someone who might not be familiar with the concept.
So it's like we can adjust the language to fit the context and the person we're talking to.
Exactly. The key is to find what works for you and the person that you're communicating with.
Okay.
And to remember that the ultimate goal is to create a space for connection and understanding.
Okay. I'm getting it. So we've covered the 4 elements of PEP.
Yeah.
Observation, feelings, needs, and requests. But I'm still a little fuzzy on how this all plays out in a real conversation.
Sure.
Do you have any examples of how we can apply these principles in a more natural, flowing way?
Absolutely. Swain includes a section in the book called Street Conversations, where he provides real-life examples of PEP in action.
Cool. Can we take a look at one of those?
Of course. Let's look at the conversation between Ted and Alice. Ted is feeling frustrated because his neighbor's music is too loud.
Okay, classic.
And he says to Alice, "My neighbor's music is always so loud.
Yeah.
It's driving me crazy."
All right. So that's his observation, or at least his attempt at an observation.
Right.
But it sounds like there's some evaluation mixed in there, too.
You're right. He's not just stating the facts. He's also injecting his own judgment and frustration into the situation.
So how does Alice respond?
She starts by simply reflecting back what she's hearing.
Okay.
She says you're feeling distracted by the noise.
So she's acknowledging his feelings, but she's not judging or offering solutions.
Exactly. And this is a key part of PEP.
Okay.
It's about creating a space for the other person to feel heard and understood before jumping into problem-solving mode.
Right. So what happens next? Does Ted launch into a rant about how inconsiderate his neighbor is?
He actually responds with more like pissed off.
Okay.
And again, Alice skillfully avoids judgment and simply acknowledges his feeling by saying, "I'm guessing you wish they'd show more consideration."
She's doing that empathetic guessing.
She is.
She's trying to understand the need that might be driving his frustration.
Exactly. And Ted confirms this by saying yes, and it's making it hard to relax at home.
Okay, so she picks up on that and says...
So having peace and quiet at home is important to you.
And I'm guessing he confirms that.
He does. He replies, "Absolutely. I need some tranquility."
Okay, so they've gone through the first 3 steps of PEP.
Yeah.
Observation, feelings, and needs.
Right.
What's the next step? Does Alice offer him some advice on how to deal with this noisy neighbor?
Interestingly enough, she doesn't.
Oh.
And that's what's so striking about this example.
Okay.
Alice doesn't offer any solutions.
Wow.
She doesn't tell Ted what to do or how to handle the situation. She simply uses PEP to understand his perspective, his feelings, and his needs.
That's really interesting. I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but I can see how just listening and empathizing could be so much more helpful than offering unsolicited advice.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious what happens next.
Yeah.
I mean, do they just sit there in silence, or does the conversation move in a different direction?
Well,
I mean, obviously it does, but I'm curious as to how does that happen?
Well, the example actually ends there, and that's a really important point because PEP isn't always about, finding an immediate solution or resolution.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it's simply about creating that space for connection and empathy, which can be a powerful catalyst for change in itself.
I can see that, like, sometimes just feeling heard and understood can be enough to kind of shift our perspective.
Right.
And help us to move forward in a more positive way.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that PEP is not a magic bullet.
Right.
It doesn't guarantee that every conflict will be resolved.
Of course.
Or that everyone will suddenly become, perfectly empathetic communicators.
Right. It's a process.
It is.
And it takes practice.
Absolutely. But the beauty of PEP is that it provides us with this framework.
Yeah.
This set of tools that we can use to navigate the complexities of human interaction with more awareness, compassion, and understanding.
So to sum up our deep dive into PEP today, I think the key takeaways are the power of observation without evaluation.
Yes.
The importance of recognizing and understanding feelings and needs. And the art of making requests that respect choice.
Beautifully put. And that leaves me with a final thought-provoking question for you.
Okay.
We've seen how focusing on needs can be a powerful way to connect and understand others.
Right.
But what are the potential pitfalls of that approach? Is there a risk of misinterpreting someone's needs or projecting our own needs onto them?
Yeah.
And how do we navigate those situations where our needs conflict with the needs of others?
Those are all excellent points to consider. So it seems like the more we learn about empathy, the more we realize how much there is to explore.
It's a lifelong journey.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this work so fascinating and so valuable.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong journey of discovery and growth.
Indeed it is.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into PEP.
You're welcome.
If you found this exploration insightful, I highly encourage you to check out Chapter 4 of A Practical Empath, Rewire Your Mind by Scott Howard Swain.
Great book.
It's full of practical tips, thought-provoking examples,
yes,
and a genuine passion for helping us all become more empathetic communicators.
It is.
Until next time, keep diving deep